Dr. Gandhi, I think we've got almost everybody. Do we want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I can take roll, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Welcome to the April 28th, 2021 Task Force for the Rule Revisions for the Arizona State Board of Pharmacy. My name is Lori Walmsley, and I will be chairing the meeting today. We'll call the meeting to order at 1:31 p.m. Dr. Gandhi, can you take a roll call, please, of the committee members?
Certainly. Ms. Walmsley,
Here.
Ms. Nair,
Here.
Mr. Dang, Mr. Pond, Ms. Ho,
Here.
Ms. Fine,
Here.
Ms. Nishi, Karen, I'll circle back. I think she's here, but she's not responding. Mr. Bozen, Mr. Morris,
Here.
Ms. Sutcliffe,
Here.
and Ms. Almer.
Here.
Okay, looks like Mr. Bozen is joining.
I'm here. This is Karen Nishi.
Karen, thank you. I can try to reach out to Mr. Dang and Mr. Pond, Madam Chair.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started in the meantime. Do you want to take declarations of conflict of interest, Dr. Gandhi?
Certainly. I don't know if it really applies right now, but we can definitely.
I don't think so either. Are there any committee members that have a conflict of interest that they'd wish to state at this time?
This is Karen. I don't have a conflict of interest, but I do work for BD, Becton Dickinson, and that company owns Pyxis, CareFusion, and Cubex.
Thank you, Ms. Nishi. Let's, I guess, do a brief introduction of committee members. Task force members. If you could state who you're with and kind of the background that you're representing. I guess I'll start and I'll just go down the list here. Lori Walmsley, Director of Pharmacy Affairs for Walgreens. My background is predominantly community pharmacy. Kristen.
Kristen Snare, and I work in pharmacy legal compliance.
Thank you. Mr. Dang is still missing. Do we have Mr. Pond?
No, I just text Mr. Pond, Madam Chair.
Okay. Emily?
Hi, my name's Emily Howe. I'm a pharmacist. I work in government affairs. I think my knowledge areas are around delivery, pharmacy automation, multi-state practice.
Thank you. Ms. Fine?
Fine, CEO of the Arizona Pharmacy Association.
Thank you. Ms. Nishi, we've already got you. Mr. Bozen?
Mark Bozen, Bozen & Snow Law Firm. I am a pharmacist and an attorney, and my pharmacy background is in specialty pharmacy.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
Roger Morris, Quarles and Brady. I teach pharmacy law at the pharmacy school. I teach FDA law at the law school, and I'm involved in work representation of all kinds of different pharmacies, wholesalers, manufacturers.
Thank you. Ms. Sutcliffe?
Hi, this is Sandy Sutcliffe. I'm a compliance officer with the Board of Pharmacy.
Thank you. And Ms. Ulmer?
I'm Michelle Ulmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona Retailers Association and the Arizona Community Pharmacy Committee, which is community pharmacies.
Thank you. Dr. Gandhi, it looks like you did a great job in putting together this task force. We've got representation from pretty much every area. Perhaps as we get a little further along in the process, we might need to bring in some subject matter experts in compounding, but I believe Mr. Dang and Mr. Pond are both from hospital pharmacy. So excellent job in your composition of the task force. I think it covers most of the areas, major areas of practice.
Madam Chair, my background is also in sterile and non-sterile compounding part of our work is assisting pharmacies with compliance gaps in those areas. And so I'd be happy to weigh in on compounding issues as well.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gandhi, would you like to kick off the discussion, or would you like me to?
If you can start, Madam Chair, and I can fill in the gaps if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our first meeting of the Rule Rewrite Task Force. The initial purpose of our meeting today is really to get the group together and start to prioritize what work needs to be done from a rule rewrite perspective. There are a number of things that the board has heard deviations for on multiple occasions, whether it be space considerations, record keeping type items. There are a number of statutory updates that are coming for this year. So my thought is perhaps those are some of the first items that we prioritize, but really want to get some feedback from the group on kind of the items that we wish to tackle first. I do see this as somewhat of a long-term process, but want to kind of establish what this task force will look like and how we plan to do the work as we move forward as a group, as well as what to expect moving forward. Dr. Gandhi, anything else to add?
I think just a couple of things to consider, obviously, from the board's perspective, as we write these regulations and think about them, we still have to maintain the mission of the board. The other thing is we have some specialties as committee members on this call. And so again, when we think about these regulations, we can't hone in on an individual business model practice. We have to look at it from a global perspective and be all encompassing that allows many players to play the game and not carve out a special section just for a business model.
Yes, well said. That being said, committee members, thoughts on kind of some of the priority items that you think we need to begin with, the items that you think should be our top priority to address?
Madam Chair, if I can jump in on that subject. I just want to remind everybody that obviously in Arizona, legislative session happens every year. Some states have the luxury of every other year. We don't. We do this every year. It is ending soon, and therefore some of these laws that are going to be, these bills that are going to be statutes in August, I feel that we should maybe prioritize those first, as we don't want to be in non-compliance with our own statutes.
Hi everyone, this is Kevin. Sorry I joined late.
Thank you, Mr. Dang. Appreciate that.
Madam Chair, also for the record, Mr. Pond is on too.
Okay, fantastic. So Dr. Gandhi, from your perspective, I know we're not quite all the way through session yet. I'm not sure you or Kelly, if you've got thoughts based on this legislative session on the things that might require rules, I guess, just to start with perhaps those sections.
Again, if I may, Madam Chair, some of the stuff that we built into our bills this year, one important one was an industry ask, which is remote hospital pharmacy, kind of like what we did with remote dispensing pharmacy a couple of years back. That is generically stated, and it should be elaborated in regulation to allow for a similar model like the telepharmacy one that was a couple of years back. That one definitely will require rule writing. It will also open up the hospital section of the regulations, which we can address a lot of, modernize that section to the most current standards.
Dr. Gandhi, this is Matt Pond. As we're doing this, do we have, or have you been successful in the past? This is my first time doing this, so I yield to your experience in this. Do we have other states that we borrow from in rule writing of precedent for how we want to modernize or best practices?
Madam Chair, if I can answer that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do have several resources. We have NABP that we lean on. They have the Model Act in case there's language there that we can borrow from. But we also, yes, definitely, it's not about reinventing the wheel if there's already a pretty decent mousetrap out there. We would piggyback off of other states as well and see what works best. Definitely.
Thank you.
So outside of the hospital work that needs to be done from this legislative session, is there anything else that we will need to address from a rule perspective from what we expect that will pass this session? I think the donation rules are something that we'll need to look at, if I remember correctly from this session. Anything else? Ms. Fine, Ms. Ulmer, one of you perhaps?
Yeah, Lori, I can add something to that.
Absolutely.
So one of the bills that we're running does reference rules, and so that's the hormonal contraception. The statute's fairly specific, so it may be one of those situations where rules may not be necessary or not substantial rules. So that's something though that we may need to look at. And then the other couple, I don't think that it would require any rules, but I can look at that.
Thank you. Anything else from a legislative standpoint that anybody has to add?
I think you've covered it. Anything that would need additional or corresponding rule changes, I think it's covered.
Okay, great. So outside of that, what are the items that anyone feels that are probably the highest priority? When I think of the deviations that we see most commonly, they're probably related to either record keeping, space considerations, or automation type technology. So those are the things that came to mind to me first. I think we could address some of the other challenges that the board has addressed in meetings within the record keeping. For example, the 106 discussion on how long it should take, how long pharmacy should have to submit a 106. So I think those things would all kind of fall within there. Thoughts from the other task force members?
Lori, I'm in agreement with your list. I would add to that list, there's a number of substantive policies the board has, and I would examine those policies and see if they should become rules. Policies are sort of this odd area that's out there, and if we think they're important enough, let's put them in the rules.
Lori,
go ahead.
In addition to what you said, I agree with what you said. Also, I was wondering if the things that we've learned from the state of emergency could be incorporated to make sure we have some possible authority or maybe some changes that were made during that time that we want to stay in place. And I would like to see technology assisted verification cleaned up so it makes sense. I don't think it's very clear on what's allowed.
Any other thoughts?
Lori, I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
So in thinking about kind of how to tackle this, I know, and I haven't gone through the rules specifically to give you examples at this point, but I know in the past, a lot of times when a statute was passed, rules were written, but they kind of duplicated what was already in statute. So if there's a way to kind of see based on statute what really needs to be in rules, if it's either redundant, already contained within the statutes, repealing that, and then making sure there's no contradictions, because I don't, over the years, I'm sure there might be some things that maybe are different than what's found in statute, but taking a look at what do we really need in rules based on what's not in statute, But if it's already worded exactly like that in statute, just getting rid of it in rules so that there's not the confusion and the need to have to update both when something gets modified.
That makes sense.
Agreed. That's been a sore subject for us for a little while.
Especially since we haven't been able to do rulemaking in so long too. So just a reminder for the group that this will still have to go through the full rulemaking process. This will need to go to the board for recommendation to see if we want to move forward with rulemaking, and then it'll have to go through the governor's office and the GERC process before we can actually move forward with the formal noticing of the rules. So we have a lot of work ahead of us here.
Madam Chair, if I may add to that, the
Yeah.
rulemaking process this year with the executive order from the governor's office has changed a little bit. We still have to get the approval authorization to do the regulation process, rules process. But then before we submit it to GERC, actually the governor's office wants to review our package prior to it going to GERC. So there's a before and after component to this year's executive order.
Any additional items of high priority for anybody on the call?
I'm curious if staff knows of any opportunities to simplify or expedite the licensing process for maybe licensees or pharmacies.
Currently, I mean, it's not on the agenda to discuss, but it's all about human capital. We haven't been immune to the COVID situation. I think regulators are just as affected as everybody else. So we had some impact there. It's just a matter of having the right amount of people, and to get the right amount of people takes legislative involvement, and they're not necessarily cooperative in beefing up agencies, as long as we're sticking still to the time frame that's defined in rules and statutes.
So there isn't anything you feel like in rule that we could examine in terms of the speed or simplification of the process?
Some of the basic requirements that are needed are still there. It's just the volume of it. And this year with the COVID situation, we've had authorization of work approvals that we had to vet out, and different processes there, which obviously we didn't charge for that process. There were some businesses that were allowed to be conducted here after vetting through us. So we had some extra measures put on the board, which took away our resources from licensing into that category and then reshifted back. So all these factors play a part. And then of course, when you have a person down, then everybody else has to pick up the slack. So again, we weren't immune to it. We are trying to figure out a better way to process a more efficient way. I think, as I discussed during the board meetings, when you get 2 or 3 applications complete out of 10, and chasing documents is where we invest most of our time.
When do we think that computer system that won't let you go beyond if you don't have it complete, when do we think that would be in place? Because I think that would be maybe possibly expedite because it would be completed.
We just sent them a email yesterday, and I believe we should be entering the testing phase here shortly. So once we know it's works properly, we'll put it into live format, and hopefully that will help. But we've also identified people that, I'll give you an example. I was reviewing an application where we asked the person for proof of lawful residence here in this country, and they uploaded their driver's license twice, and that lawful residence is either a passport or a birth certificate. Now we're going to have to, so they can input anything they want, right? In this case, they inputted 2 driver's license pictures in 2 different categories. So now we're chasing down a passport or a birth certificate. So it'll help, I think. We may increase our completeness levels a little bit. We'll still have opportunity, but it is in the works, to answer your question.
Okay.
It should be
that might be a good discussion for the full board versus this forum.
Yeah.
Laura, you asked if there's anything else. This may have been already subsumed in some of your earlier comments, but the board had an earlier task force on technician scope expansion, and I just didn't know where that fit with these rules updates.
And that's a really good point, Roger. I don't know if we have an update on that, but I know that is a priority and something that's addressed, to Kristen's point, even in the COVID emergency.
So we did talk about that a couple of meetings ago. And I believe, Kelly, you're still trying to work with ARMA, right? Regarding that, we had some sort of agreeable language, and
Yes, we did have a meeting with them about a week ago. Went through the proposed kind of draft rules that were approved by the board, answered all of their questions. And so we, Michelle and I put together a packet to kind of send over to them because they were going to discuss it with their kind of legislative committee, just to make sure, you know, there weren't any concerns with what we were proposing. On the surface, they seemed to be okay with what we were doing and understood why we were wanting to do that. But we just need to wait to hear back from them on that. And then get back to the governor's office on what their response was. But had some good feedback. I think we answered most of their questions. So hopefully we'll have a definitive update in a week or so.
Yeah, Roger, thank you for bringing that up. That was on my mind too. Especially if this process is going to be kind of lengthy, then we should have an opportunity to have heard back from ARMA and the governor's office, and maybe we can incorporate that or expedite it even faster than this.
And sorry, Michelle.
I have on my to-do list for Friday is to reach out to ARMA. As Kelly said, during that meeting, we asked them to be ready to discuss things the first week of May. And so we have a target date of the 4th or 5th to try to get back together. So I'm going to send out a request for a meeting this Friday to see if we can get something on the books for next week.
Thank you both. And Kim, I don't know if this is a good point of discussion. I'm not sure if you had a conversation with the governor's office about their preference. Do they want us to put all of our changes together, or would they rather see multiple small requests over a period of time?
I've spoken to both GERC and the governor's office. GERC, I put it in the packet as an attachment of an expedited rules process. I don't know if you saw that. So GERC has the ability to digest an entire comprehensive rules package if we submit that to them. So that's not a problem. The governor's office, again, doesn't have heartburn about us doing it in its entirety. We just have to get their approval and maybe feed it to them slowly, saying, hey, this is what we have so far. This is the next section. This is the next section, because it's going to take them time to review behind the scenes.
Do we have a preference as a group of what we would want to do? Would we rather, knowing that this is going to probably take some time to get through all the sections, if we're going to look at all the rules and the substantive policies and things like that, do we have a preference as a group of how we would want to handle that? Do we want to wait and submit it all together, or do we want to hold off or do we want to do it in pieces?
What's the most likely to get passed, get it through to them? Is it just little by little going to be overwhelming? Do we know strategy wise which best?
If I may, strategy wise, I think the best thing to do is when we're comfortable with a section to submit that. And that way they can have their legal team review it behind the scenes and then chime back in an event we need to readdress some issues. If we do a comprehensive package, it's going to take them a longer time to review it all. And then they'll come back to us and we may have to address it anyways. This way we can reincorporate that section back into our discussion as we're talking about other things and address it, and then so we can continue to move the process forward.
Just playing devil's advocate a little bit too. I know in working on similar projects in the past, sometimes you may not foresee changes that need to be made until you get to maybe another section. So my fear would be is that we may have already submitted something and then realize, oh, maybe this conflicts now with what we're trying to do in another section. And so that might be a little tricky to navigate if we submit it piece by piece versus as a whole. Just a thought.
And the governor's request is that prior to any notice of rulemaking docket opening, they want to review and approve essentially what you're proposing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you been informed of what will happen if the proposed rules are amended in any way pursuant to public comment? Do they have to go back to the governor's office then before the board decides whether to amend the rules because of public comment?
From my conversation with the policy advisor there is if it's a significant change, probably. But if it's just a little change that doesn't really take away from the intent of what we're trying to do, then no.
Dr. Gandhi, so I'm sure, is there this new step where we have to have an additional approval? I'm guessing that comes after the full board approval of the proposal, correct? It's not happening after this committee before it goes to the full board?
Let me pull up that executive order real quick so I'm not.
The reason I ask is because I think there may be a lot of nuance with timing if we do decide to do it in a piecemeal format that way to catch board meetings and then submit.
All right, so it's on page 2 of the executive order. It actually is submitted after public comment. So after the public comment period and the close of the rule-making record, a state agency subject to this order shall not submit the proposed rules to GERC without a written final approval from the office of the governor. Before considering rules submitted by the state agency, the governor's GERC must obtain from the state agency the initial approval referenced in section 1 and the final approval from the governor's office.
So let's break down what that flow will look like then. So as a task force, we will have recommendations that are brought to the full board, correct?
Correct.
The board will then make a decision on if we wish to accept the recommendations of the task force or make modifications.
Correct.
At which point it would go for public comment.
Yeah, well, at that point, our rule writer has to work some magic with Secretary of State to post it for public comment.
Not until the board opens a rulemaking docket.
A docket, correct.
And adopts the proposed rules. Those two things have to happen. Then you have the public comment.
And then it goes to GERC and then the governor's office.
No, it goes to the governor's office and then to GERC.
The record, you have to do the public comment. The board has to decide if they're going to make any changes pursuant to the public comment. The rulemaking docket is closed. The rulemaking record is closed. And then normally it would go to GERC, but pursuant to the order, it has to go to the governor's office. So theoretically, you could get all the way through, like GERC is your last step. You theoretically could get through 90% of the rulemaking process, and we're talking months. And then it goes to the governor's office, and I'm not sure what could happen there.
Okay. Any questions on the process? Clear as mud.
You know, this is Michelle. Based on that, is there a way for us to, I'm worried about the length of time, and as Kelly pointed out, maybe, you know, if you're doing this over an extended period of time, it's hard to keep track of what section could conflict with the other until you're on top of it. Is there a way for us to do something like giving the governor's office kind of a heads up on what we're doing, but not do a full submission, so that we can do this all at once? And it's not, because as Ms. Galvin said, it could take months. And if we're taking months on each section, this could really drag out for years.
My guess is, because the submission doesn't get to the governor's office until the rulemaking record is closed, you're going to have one big package with all the sections in it. I don't think you're going to run, you know, 16 different rule packages, each relating to a separate section. So after looking at this executive order, I am envisioning one rule package with all the sections that are amended or newly promulgated in one package.
Okay.
So I have a question about that. If they don't like one section, does that negate everything, the full package, or do they send it back and say this section is a no, or we have questions on this?
Cam, if you want, the statute says if there is a substantive change between what you have proposed and what is the final rule package, meaning after public comment and the board adopts the final rule package, if there's a substantive change, you have to start over. So if it gets to the governor's office after public comment and the board adopts the final rules, but it doesn't go to GERC, and if they don't like something or they want something changed or a provision taken out that could result in a declaration that it was a substantive change, and you would have to start over. In this instance, because your rules get approved by GERC would essentially decide what is a substantive change.
I have a question. Is there the possibility to maybe handle some things that the committee, board, or staff thinks are priority on their own? And maybe we think those are the highest impact things kind of in one package. And then from there, start reworking as a whole with that model that we had only done like one additional edit, and that comes later.
Based on the items that we discussed today that we think are the priorities, I think this is going to touch almost everything.
One thought I had too, and I don't know if everyone is agreeable to this, but because this seems like a big project with a lot of sections, if there's committee members, and there's different expertise obviously on the committee, but if there's a way to kind of divide and conquer, at least looking at sections, maybe doing some research and presenting information to the committee for those sections, it may help speed things along if people are in charge of certain sections or willing to take ownership over certain sections, to look at what might be outdated. Does it conflict with statutes? Is it redundant based on what's in the statute? And then if it needs updating, what are some relevant states maybe we can look to for some language, and come back to the committee and kind of do a little mini, presentation on that section to kind of give the group an overview of what they found, and then the committee can kind of decide how to proceed. Because I can see this taking a long time.
That's kind of what I was thinking too, Kelly. I mean, we all have different areas of subject matter expertise, and I think we have a lot of people here that have understanding of laws in multiple states and have perspective from other states, which is great. One of the questions I had in thinking about this, because I can see how there's going to be the need for homework in between probably meetings. We probably need to come out of here and establish the topics we're going to talk about at the next meeting and figure out how we're going to prepare for a real substantive conversation on that. Ms. Galvin, is it possible for us as a task force to have like a shared Google Drive or SharePoint or something like that, where we could, in the interim in between meetings, if we had assigned sections, to have a place where the task force members could either redline or provide comments on the document as the basis for a starting point in a conversation for our next meeting?
To be sure I understand it. So say that Ms. Walmsley, you're working on 2 or 3 sections, you upload it to a shared drive, and then Roger comes along, another member of this committee, and edits or offers suggested edits to your document. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
That would violate the open meeting law.
Okay.
In my opinion. Because you're doing committee work in drafting these rules, making suggested revisions, drafting new rules out of whole cloth outside of a public meeting. And that's committee business, committee work that has to be done in open meeting. If you were just posting it or sending it to Cam and saying, here's what I've done, and then everybody has access to it to look at it in preparation of the next meeting, that's fine. But you can't go from committee person to committee person to committee person to make revisions in advance of the next meeting.
So we could.
But could the Google Doc be published? That it's public, that the edits are merged, I'm sorry, that edits are tracked?
But if those edits are made outside of a public meeting by successive committee members, that's still a violation, even though in the end, the work product could be published.
So we would have to independently make comments and either share that with Dr. Gandhi in advance of the meeting as a pre-read basically from each committee member, or just review it, do it individually and review that work during a meeting, if I'm understanding you.
Yes, to your latest or last statement. I'm not clear on your first statement.
So several people would be assigned, for example, one particular section to work on. So say, for example, the legislative updates that are needed for the remote hospital, and then anything else within the hospital section, perhaps Mr. Dang and Mr. Pond could be the experts that would take a stab at that prior to the meeting. If they wanted to have the opportunity for all of us to review that, say before the next meeting, they would need to provide that individually to Dr. Gandhi, and then that could be provided as a pre-read to the committee members.
Correct.
Okay.
I like that idea, Lori. This is Kevin.
This is Karen. How do other boards update their regulations, trying to get input from a lot of the committee members? Is that you just do it like that, send it to Cam, and then he'll send it back out? Is that pretty standard, or I don't know?
Not every board does it the same way. Every state has kind of their own rulemaking process. Not everybody uses a committee to work on rules, at least from my personal experience. A lot of times they just rely on the public feedback once it gets to the point of public comment.
This board is very fortunate in that they do have a rules writer, and I'm familiar with a number of agencies and how they go about promulgating rules, and the rule writer will often attend these meetings, take in what you're saying, understand what changes you want, meet with Cam and take it all in, and then she will go back and do that drafting and make those revisions. I don't know, Cam, what is in the budget as far as how much attendance at meetings and consulting with the committee, if the budget would allow that for your rule writer, I don't know.
All right. Any additional thoughts? So Dr. Gandhi, recommendations on how to proceed from here? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I can pull, we're going to obviously next week going to be discussing all the bills that have been signed. Some other bills may have already been signed that pertain to us as well. And then I can isolate which ones require rule writing, which ones don't, filter those out to the committee members. And then we'll start putting the pen to the paper.
How many sections do we think that we should try and tackle for our next meeting?
Honestly, Lori, I think the hospital one's going to take time personally.
Okay.
Because I think that whole section can be opened up, and our hospital regs have been, they're pretty dated. So I think we need to catch that up to current practices anyways. I can pull all the substantive policies that we have pertaining to hospitals as well. In an event, we can incorporate that into that section as well.
Okay. Do we think we can address any other sections outside of hospital at the next meeting?
I could circle back with Kelly and we can look at some of her oral contraceptive bill and see if that needs any touching as far as regulations go. So yeah, I mean, I can pull some, hospital's a big one, and I can maybe pull the OCP one and any other low fruit that we can manage to incorporate, because I think the hospital is going to be the big one.
Any other suggestions from the committee member on low-hanging fruit that we can tackle for the next meeting?
Are we going to go by like articles in the rules and look at it? I mean, I know some of them are large and we'll probably have to divide them up, but does it make sense to, because this is our, first go round, maybe pick one that isn't too intensive and see how the process goes? And I don't know if I have an example. I'm trying to look through and see if I could find one, but just so that we can all kind of look at it, look at the rules, figure out if there's any suggestions that we can bring back based on that section.
Anybody have suggestions of one that they think might be a little easier?
I think
So
cleaning
I have
up
a
technology assisted verification would be easy.
Roger,
I have a
did you have
question.
another thought? Okay.
Yeah, I just have a question related to this. Are we trying as this committee right now to say, here's the current rule and here's our proposed changes? Are we saying, here's the current rule and here's the kind of changes we want? And then are we going to leave that to the rule writer to write, or are we writing it? I'm just not clear what we're trying to accomplish here in terms of it, because there are different ways to make this work.
So far
Cam?
to date, Roger, what I've taken is I've tried to gather the thoughts of the board and the public and have written the rules from that feedback. And I'll present that to the board. And then if the board is okay with the intent of my revision, my update, then I submit it to my rule writer and she makes it into a format that's compliant with GERC and the state without taking away the intent of what we're trying to do.
Okay, so let me use a practical example. We have a substantive policy on transfer of original prescriptions. If we said, you know what, that's one we think we should just put into rules to be able to do that. Would that then effectively, at that point, you'd present it to the board? If they agree, the rule writer would then write it?
Yeah, I can just send her, in that case, I can send her the substantive policy and she can incorporate that, yes.
Because I think we can make a lot more progress that way. And then if we need to at some point, we can get into fine wordsmithing, but I'm hoping at the most part, it's not wordsmithing, it's concept.
If I'm allowed to share my screen, I'll identify a few things that we've been already working on. Kind of like to Kelly's point, there are some redundancies we've identified, especially in the Controlled Substance Act. Let me see if I can pull that up. Are you able to see my screen, guys?
Yes.
I can enlarge it for folks that need it enlarged, but as you can see, we've kind of redlined a lot of it and added some revisions to make it more clear. And this is, again, the CSPMP section. As you can see, we've taken out a lot of redundancy that's in play already in that section. So we have been kind of working on this already. There was another one that we were working on before we decided to go with this comprehensive rules package. Again, there's power and duties of the board, some redundancy language that doesn't make sense, which we were trying to eliminate. Big section is on this one is down here where we're deregulated non-prescription retailers. So what I was looking to do here is redline most of that section and just reference the CFR if I could find one to be still compliant with how the product is maintained in the store and stuff like that, temperature control and humidity and so forth. But we have been working a little bit on some of these things.
So maybe in addition to the hospital section, that's what we should do is we should take these couple that you have that are already started as a pre-read for the next meeting and look and see if that is all if there are any other additional pieces of feedback for those sections from this group, since that work has already started.
Yeah, I can filter it out so you guys can understand. Obviously, red line and red means you're eliminating, and a blueprint is adding language and so forth. So you can kind of figure out the format. But this is how I start the process and then continue to build on that.
Committee members, does that make sense?
I think so.
I think the substantive policies, to your point too, Roger, are probably some low-hanging fruit to decide if that's at least a recommendation that we want to bring forward to the board as a permanent rule change.
Correct. And I do think at some point we're going to have to just go through the rules article by article or title by title just to go through it. But whether we jump out of order, I don't care.
All right. How frequently do we think we are going to need to meet moving forward? Is this a monthly type discussion? Is it more frequent than that? Is it less frequent than that? I do want to make sure people have time to prepare in between to make sure that we're ready to have an actual substantive conversation.
So I'll throw out a proposal, and this may be too soon, but I would say let's start it at every 2 weeks for 3 or 4 meetings, and then let's see if we need to change the pace or we can't do it. But that way we'll at least get some momentum.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think monthly is probably too long to start.
Okay. Dr. Gandhi, any concerns from staff perspective?
We just have to obviously make note of any conflicting meetings that might be taking place. After this meeting, our first meeting would probably have to take place the week of May 17th. because I have an NABP conference the week prior. So we can't do every 2 weeks. At that point, it'll be a third week. But then, yeah, we can follow every 2 or 3 week cycle after that.
Okay.
And then we can just keep an eye on the calendar, making sure it doesn't conflict with our board meetings or conferences that we have set up.
Okay. That sounds good. Maybe we can get a doodle poll to pull together dates for the first maybe 3 or 4 meetings to get started after this as an action item. And then in preparation for the next meeting, Dr. Gandhi, can you provide, and we can perhaps even take this offline, but I think we should provide some homework in advance. So the sections that we want to have discussion on, the hospital section, as well as perhaps the contraceptives to be ready for that, the areas that you have already kind of started that work on, and then be prepared as a committee to come back and have some discussion around those particular areas. If we think we'll have time, the substantive policies, yay or nay on those.
Are you going to group them, like assign them out different subjects to different groups of people, or everyone work on the same thing?
Not knowing all the areas that Dr. Gandhi has pulled together, some of them I think are going to probably be a little bit subject matter expertise. I can work with Dr. Gandhi to assign things out if that is the will of the committee, or if it's general in nature, perhaps everyone reviews it, or if there's certain sections that people have a particular interest in, even if it's not their area of expertise. Perhaps, Mr. Morris has some experience from another state, or Mr. Bozen. I don't know the best way to address that, but Dr. Gandhi and I can even work offline if that's appropriate for the committee.
I don't care either way. I was just curious.
I think there are some that everybody will probably need to weigh in on. Dr. Gandhi, when do you think you could have at least the sections that we're looking at putting together? I know we have a meeting next week, but when do you think we could have at least the sections or information pulled together so that we can take a look at that to see who makes sense from a committee standpoint to review?
If you and I can maybe touch base tomorrow. The proposed regs that I just shared with you, I can definitely filter those out. I think for the most part, it's complete. We may need little touch-ups here and there, but at least they get a flavor of what we're doing and what they're looking.
Okay.
I know Michelle, yourself, Kristen may have a little more experience. Roger, but Emily, that might be new to you. Kelly's an expert. But I'll get it out. At least you'll kind of get an idea of what I was working on.
Okay.
And then we'll figure out the bills as I start carving them out, see which ones need attention. And then you and I can touch base. And
okay. Any additional thoughts from the group?
I just have a question. Did we say that we were going to do the policies first too, or just the drafts that are already in existence and the legislative stuff?
What do you think?
Are you asking me?
No, just as a group. I'm open to either. I don't know how much work it's going to be.
If you pose a problem, Emily, if you pose a problem, you got to come with a solution.
Let me look at how many policies there are.
Well, there aren't that many policies. This is Mark Bozen. I'm thinking I could take as some homework along with other folks. To Roger's point, I think we need a plenary review of the regulations start to finish. And so I'm thinking maybe as homework, present to the next meeting for discussion a crosswalk of sorts. We've got 12 policies, substantive policies. They seem to fit R423 600, whatever it is. Does it exist because our 423-600 is wrong or different? And do we need to just harmonize the language? Or does the substantive policy exist because there's no rule on it anywhere? And do we need to number a new rule? And then look at the bills too that have passed, and there are a lot of them. But I think do the same thing. So changes were made to this part of the Pharmacy Practice Act. It works with this part of the rule, and you end up with a crosswalk of sorts that then this committee might be able to use at the next meeting to say, all right, looking at this, here are the easy ones, here are the harder ones, and maybe that's a way to organize next steps.
I think that would be fantastic. Dr. Gandhi, does that work? Would that be helpful to the staff?
I think so. I think so.
Okay, I'll take that as an assignment. I'll have my group here work on it. I've got a brand new associate here who the other day said, hey, it's a little bit slow for me. And I'm like, oh, no. It's never slow for you here. We can help with that, bring it to the next meeting, and discuss it as a group.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mark. Any additional thoughts from the group?
I just have an additional question. I'm sorry. I know I'm chatty today. I'm kind of curious as to how, outside of public comment on the actual like proposals, how else like the public can be involved in making comments here. I think, like everyone said, there are a lot of different subject matter experts, but there may be some things that aren't considered here that may need to be.
I agree with that statement.
During the public comment section, and the notice of public comment they can come to the board meeting. We do assign a date and time that they can show up at the board office to share their thoughts. They also have the ability to email me directly with their public comments on sections that we haven't touched or sections we have, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Those that I can bring back before either the committee or the full board.
Cam, if I may, I know other agencies prior to the public comment period, because remember, once you have the public comment period, any changes have to be analyzed, whether they're substantive. So I am aware of other agencies, even before they're in their proposed stage, will post the draft rules on their website, where regulated parties tend to look more often than maybe the Secretary of State's, administrative code or register. And that offers them an opportunity to make informal comments that can be helpful. It's not required.
I think that's a great idea. And I don't know if there's a way that we could do something similar that we did even for the COVID questions, where people could submit suggestions for consideration. But I think especially given the fact that there are these multi-step processes for us to get rules approved, feedback sooner in the process, I think would certainly be helpful to the board so that it doesn't hold back the rulemaking process.
I did touch base with Crystal, Madam Chair, regarding creating a link to provide feedback, and she's able to do that. So we can set up a process.
Great.
And just remember, those comments should be part of your rulemaking record.
Yes.
Anything additional? Dr. Gandhi, do you need any additional direction for our next meeting?
No, I will send out a doodle invite to see what works best for everybody. And again, you and I can connect, and we'll figure out next steps.
Okay, great. Mark, appreciate your offer to do some of the pre-work between the meetings here.
My pleasure.
Anything else before we adjourn as a group? For the good of the order. All right. Dr. Gunn, anything else from your perspective?
No, I think we got a lot of work to do.
Agreed. All right. I don't have anything else on the agenda, so we can go ahead and adjourn for today. And I appreciate everybody's willingness to serve and to participate in this exciting but probably long process. So thank you very much. I appreciate your service to Arizona.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.